ditinggalkan sehingga diri bagaikan hewan. Hari ke hari yang dipikirkan kisah cinta dan kasih sayang.
Semarang adalah kota metropolitan terbesar kelima di Indonesia yang terus berkembang pesat dengan kehidupan sosial masyarakatnya yang heterogen, toleran, dan damai. Kini Semarang juga tumbuh menjadi salah satu kota pendidikan yang sangat diperhitungkan. Salah satu pilar penyangga pendidikan tinggi utama di Semarang adalah Universitas Islam Sultan Agung Unisula yang didirikan oleh Yayasan Badan Wakaf Sultan Agung pada tanggal 20 Mei 1962. Unisula menawarkan konsep pendidikan komprehensif berbasis Islam dengan budaya akademik Islami sebagai strategi pendidikannya. Inilah konsep pendidikan yang menjadi jawaban atas kelemahan dunia pendidikan dewasa ini yang hanya fokus pada transfer ilmu pengetahuan. Di Unisula, para mahasiswa dibudayakan untuk menguatkan ruhiyah dan iptek yang diimplementasikan melalui penguatan akidah, ibadah, akhlak, gerakan sholat berjamaah, gerakan berbusana Islami, gerakan toharoh, gerakan keteladanan, gerakan keramahan Islami, gerakan kualitas hidup, memperkuat semangat ikro, mengembangkan iptek atas dasar nilai-nilai Islam, Islamic Learning Society, serta apresiasi iptek. Inilah terobosan pendidikan yang diharapkan mampu menjawab tantangan zaman dengan mengkader generasi unggul yang bertakwa, kompeten, dan berdaya saing. Unisula memiliki berbagai fasilitas unggulan, antara lain perpustakaan terakreditasi A yang modern dan memiliki peranan penting dalam membangun pilar pengembangan Islamic Learning Society. Sebagai penunjang akademik utama, laboratorium menjadi sangat penting keberadaannya. Unisula berusaha memenuhi kebutuhan ini dan menjadikan prioritas untuk terus dikembangkan. Pesantren mahasiswa yang disediakan bagi para mahasiswa dari luar kota, khususnya prodi keperawatan, kebidanan, dan studi sejarah peradaban Islam sangat representatif. Kantin Pujasera Pumanisa menyediakan berbagai kebutuhan mahasiswa akan kuliner Nusantara, dilengkapi juga dengan pusat kewirausahaan mahasiswa. Memiliki Masjid Kampus Sultan Agung, Masjid Abu Bakar Assegaf. Rumah sakit pendidikan yang terintegrasi dengan Rumah Sakit Islam Sultan Agung juga menjadi fasilitas unggulan yang diakui excellent dalam pelayanan. Untuk menyalurkan minat bakat mahasiswa, di Unisula terdapat unit kegiatan mahasiswa yang beragam, seperti Mapala, Taekwondo, Tarung Derajat, Pencaksilat, PMI, unit kegiatan mahasiswa pengamalan Islam, kelompok seni budaya, Menwa, Pramuka, dan masih banyak lagi. Sebagai world class Islamic University, Unisula telah menjadi pilihan kuliah mahasiswa dari berbagai negara. Unisula juga terbukti berhasil mengantarkan para mahasiswanya menempuh pendidikan di berbagai universitas mitra di luar negeri. Universitas juga memfasilitasi para mahasiswanya untuk terampil berbahasa internasional seperti bahasa Inggris, Arab, dan Korea. Mahasiswa-mahasiswa Unisula juga memiliki prestasi di kelas dunia, antara lain menjadi juara umum kontes robotik di Trinity College Amerika Serikat pada bulan April 2016 dengan mengalahkan tim-tim kuat dari Cina, Israel, Amerika, dan lain-lain. Unisula didukung oleh para dosen yang kompeten di bidangnya, antara lain Profesor Dr. S. Imam Wahyudi Dea yang memiliki kepakaran di bidang water management yang berhasil menginisiasi berdirinya Delta Center on Climate Change pertama di Indonesia.
Kami memiliki pusat unggulan yang namanya Delta Center on Climate Change yang pertama di Indonesia, dan kami ada kerjasama yang sangat erat dengan Rotterdam University, Belanda. Pusat unggulan ini diharapkan dapat memberi sumbangan bagi penyelesaian masalah pantai, khususnya rob dan banjir yang ada di sepanjang wilayah pantai utara Jawa.
Dengan berbagai keunggulan kompetitif tersebut, diharapkan menjadi bekal para lulusan Unisula dalam memenangkan persaingan di era global.
berkekuatan 9,15 skala Richter pada 26 Desember 2004 memicu gelombang tsunami di Samudra Hindia. Musibah itu dianggap sebagai bencana alam terbesar dalam sejarah.
Pemirsa, gempa magnitudo 7,4 terjadi di Donggala, Sulawesi Tengah sore kemarin.
Pemirsa, hujan deras yang mengguyur kota Semarang beberapa hari terakhir mengakibatkan jalan Kaligawe Semarang kembali tergenang banjir.
Negara Indonesia yang merupakan negara kepulauan ini sering disebut sebagai supermarketnya bencana. Ini karena faktanya lokasi Indonesia yang diapit oleh 4 lempeng benua atau Ring of Fire berpotensi besar untuk terjadi gempa bumi yang menimbulkan tsunami, banjir, longsor, likuifaksi, dan robohnya bangunan-bangunan. Bencana-bencana ini selain menimbulkan kerugian materi juga menyebabkan banyak kematian. Untuk meminimalkan kerugian akibat bencana ini, perlu adanya ilmu pengetahuan dan teknologi yang mumpuni untuk mengatasi problem tersebut. Ilmu pengetahuan dan teknologi itu ada dan dipelajari di dalam teknik sipil. Teknik sipil adalah salah satu cabang ilmu teknik yang mempelajari tentang bagaimana merancang, membangun, merenovasi tidak hanya gedung dan infrastruktur, tetapi juga mencakup lingkungan untuk kemaslahatan hidup manusia.
Unisula, Universitas Islam Sultan Agung now have one center excellence named Delta Center on Climate Change that works on research on delta area, including coastal area, estuary area, river area as well, and that occur some problem like sea level rise, land subsidence, and climate anomaly. And to support this research, we have some cooperation, especially with Rotterdam University in the Netherlands and non-University France.
Fakultas Teknik Universitas Islam Sultan Agung Unisula dengan program studi teknik sipil dan perencanaan wilayah dan kota telah hadir 55 tahun memberi warna pada dunia pendidikan Indonesia sesuai visi dan misinya untuk memberikan kontribusi dalam penanganan bencana serta menghasilkan para lulusan yang kompeten dalam ilmu pengetahuan dan teknologi keteknik sipilan dan keplanologian.
Indonesia adalah salah satu negara berkembang yang terus mengalami perkembangan. Pertumbuhan urbanisasi disertai dengan pertumbuhan penduduk yang terus meningkat menjadikannya suatu potensi permasalahan dan tantangan untuk perkotaan dan pedesaan. Untuk menjawab hal tersebut, Unisula mendirikan Prodi Perencanaan Wilayah dan Kota atau disebut juga Planologi. Berdiri sejak 1998 dan telah meluluskan banyak lulusan yang telah tersebar di seluruh Nusantara.
Visi program studi kami adalah menjadi program studi yang unggul dan terkemuka di bidang perencanaan wilayah dan kota di negara berkembang berdasarkan nilai-nilai Islam pada tahun 2024. Visi tersebut kami jabarkan menjadi 4 misi. Yang pertama, menyelenggarakan program studi perencanaan wilayah dan kota yang unggul di negara berkembang dengan mengembangkan pelayanan yang kredibel, transparan, akuntabel, dan bertanggung jawab. Kemudian yang kedua, mendidik dan mengembangkan sumber daya insani pada strata pendidikan tinggi di bidang ilmu rekayasa perencanaan wilayah dan kota sesuai dengan nilai-nilai Islam. Yang ketiga, merekonstruksi dan mengembangkan ilmu perencanaan wilayah dan kota serta penerapannya melalui bidang penelitian berdasarkan nilai-nilai Islam. Dan yang terakhir adalah dengan berperan aktif dalam pembangunan di bidang perencanaan wilayah dan kota di negara berkembang melalui penelitian dan pengabdian masyarakat serta melakukan publikasi.
Selain visi dan misi yang visioner, kondisi kampus yang masih asri dan sejuk menambah kenyamanan mahasiswa untuk menempuh perkuliahan setiap hari. Sarana olahraga yang lengkap mampu untuk mendukung dan mendorong minat dan bakat mahasiswa. Aktivitas mahasiswa dan fasilitas yang memadai menjadikan proses pembelajaran terasa menyenangkan. Didukung sarana yang memadai dan mampu menunjang pembelajaran secara aktif, seperti Lab Studio Perencanaan Wilayah sebagai wadah lab penelitian pengembangan skala wilayah dan klinik tata ruang bagi semua orang. Lab Perancangan sebagai lab berbasis perancangan dilengkapi dengan model-model market dan komputer spek tinggi untuk aktivitas mahasiswa melakukan rendering animasi 3D kawasan. Lab Geospasial sebagai wadah bagi pengembangan aktivitas pemetaan, desain web GIS, serta perencanaan penerbangan drone untuk pengambilan foto udara. Lab ini juga didukung oleh komputer spek tinggi untuk aktivitas mahasiswa melakukan rendering hasil foto udara, serta memiliki ruang pamer yang bertujuan memajang hasil kreativitas mahasiswa. Dalam pembangunan karakter mahasiswa, Prodi Perencanaan Wilayah dan Kota memiliki himpunan mahasiswa yang tiap tahunnya mengadakan kegiatan untuk terus mengasah keterampilan bagi para mahasiswanya. Acara kegiatan tahunan himpunan meliputi workshop rutin yang tahun kemarin mengadakan workshop fotografi, Smart Tech atau seminar nasional yang selalu membahas info paling aktual, Plano Raya, kegiatan bela tahunan yang mewadahi semua bakat mahasiswa. Kampung Mitra adalah kegiatan pengabdian kepada masyarakat. Studi banding, kegiatan belajar dan sharing dengan mahasiswa di universitas lain. Survei adalah kegiatan pelatihan yang diperuntukkan untuk mengasah skill survei para mahasiswa. Selain itu, adanya program KKN dan KKL dari fakultas diharapkan menjadi penunjang skill mahasiswa untuk semakin adaptif dalam menghadapi persaingan global. Adanya kerjasama dengan beberapa universitas internasional menjadikan Prodi Perencanaan Wilayah dan Kota selalu mengirim mahasiswa terbaiknya untuk mengikuti pertukaran pelajar yang diselenggarakan setiap tahunnya. Selain itu, juga terdapat beberapa prestasi yang telah dicapai oleh dosen dan mahasiswa. Dan juga merupakan bagian dari ASPI dan IAP, serta menjalin berbagai kerjasama dengan instansi dan institusi dalam dan luar negeri.
Perencanaan wilayah dan kota Unisula, kreatif, adaptif, dan inovatif. Perencanaan wilayah dan kota Unisula, agamis, tangguh, dan berwawasan tunggal.
Program studi perencanaan wilayah dan kota Unisula, agamis, prestasi konkret.
Semarang adalah kota metropolitan terbesar kelima di Indonesia yang terus berkembang pesat dengan kehidupan sosial masyarakatnya yang heterogen, toleran, dan damai. Kini Semarang juga tumbuh menjadi salah satu kota pendidikan yang sangat diperhitungkan. Salah satu pilar penyangga pendidikan tinggi utama di Semarang adalah Universitas Islam Sultan Agung Unisula yang didirikan oleh Yayasan Badan Wakaf Sultan Agung pada tanggal 20 Mei 1962. Unisula menawarkan konsep pendidikan komprehensif berbasis Islam dengan budaya akademik Islami sebagai strategi pendidikannya. Inilah konsep pendidikan yang menjadi jawaban atas kelemahan dunia pendidikan dewasa ini yang hanya fokus pada transfer ilmu pengetahuan. Di Unisula, para mahasiswa dibudayakan untuk menguatkan ruhiyah dan iptek yang diimplementasikan melalui penguatan akidah, ibadah, akhlak, gerakan sholat berjamaah, gerakan berbusana Islami, gerakan toharoh, gerakan keteladanan, gerakan keramahan Islami. Sebagai penunjang akademik utama, laboratorium menjadi sangat penting keberadaannya. Unisula berusaha memenuhi kebutuhan ini dan menjadikan prioritas untuk terus dikembangkan. Pesantren mahasiswa yang disediakan bagi para mahasiswa dari luar kota, khususnya prodi keperawatan, kebidanan, dan studi sejarah peradaban Islam sangat representatif. Kantin Pujasera Pumanisa menyediakan berbagai kebutuhan mahasiswa akan kuliner Nusantara, dilengkapi juga dengan pusat kewirausahaan mahasiswa. Memiliki Masjid Kampus Sultan Agung, Masjid Abu Bakar Assegaf. Rumah sakit pendidikan yang terintegrasi dengan Rumah Sakit Islam Sultan Agung juga menjadi fasilitas unggulan yang diakui excellent dalam pelayanan. Untuk menyalurkan minat bakat mahasiswa, di Unisula terdapat unit kegiatan mahasiswa yang beragam, seperti Mapala, Taekwondo, Tarung Derajat, Pencaksilat, PMI, unit kegiatan mahasiswa pengamalan Islam, kelompok seni budaya, Menwa, Pramuka, dan masih banyak lagi. Sebagai world class Islamic University, Unisula telah menjadi pilihan kuliah mahasiswa dari berbagai negara. Unisula juga terbukti berhasil mengantarkan para mahasiswanya menempuh pendidikan di berbagai universitas mitra di luar negeri. Universitas juga memfasilitasi para mahasiswanya untuk terampil berbahasa internasional seperti bahasa Inggris, Arab, dan Korea. Mahasiswa-mahasiswa Unisula juga memiliki prestasi di kelas dunia, antara lain menjadi juara umum kontes robotik di Trinity College Amerika Serikat pada bulan April 2016 dengan mengalahkan tim-tim kuat dari Cina, Israel, Amerika, dan lain-lain. Unisula didukung oleh para dosen yang kompeten di bidangnya, antara lain Profesor Dr. S. Imam Wahyudi Dea yang memiliki kepakaran di bidang water management yang berhasil menginisiasi berdirinya Delta Center.
Kami memiliki pusat unggulan yang namanya Delta Center on Climate Change yang pertama di Indonesia, dan kami ada kerjasama yang sangat erat dengan Rotterdam University, Belanda. Pusat unggulan ini diharapkan dapat memberi sumbangan bagi penyelesaian masalah pantai, khususnya rob dan banjir yang ada di sepanjang wilayah pantai utara Jawa.
Dengan berbagai keunggulan kompetitif tersebut, diharapkan menjadi bekal para lulusan Unisula dalam memenangkan persaingan di era global.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. The honorable team from University of Bremen, Germany, honorable team from Universitas Indonesia, honorable the Dean of Engineering Faculty Unisula, Vice of the Dean, Head and Secretary Programs, both postgraduate and undergraduate programs, lecturers, staff, and students in Engineering Faculty Unisula, namely opening. So let's open our agenda today by reciting Basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. May our agenda today be running well. Amen. Next, let's listen to the national anthem of Indonesia and hymn of Unisula. So everyone, please stand up. You may have a seat. The next agenda is opening speech by the Dean of Engineering Faculty. We please Mr. Rahmat Mudiono, MT PhD, to come to the stage.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahilladzi arsala rasulahu bil huda wa dinil haqq liyudhhirahu ala dini kullih wa kafa billahi syahida. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma shalli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad. Raditu billahi rabbah wa bil islami dina wa bil Muhammadin nabiyya wa rasulah. Rabbi zidni ilma warzuqni fahma, amin. Honorable Dr. Johannes Herbeck and Dr. Rapti Siriwardani and team from University of Bremen, Germany. Welcome. Honorable team from University of Indonesia, Miss Mutia, Mas Iqbal and Mbak Sasa. Selamat datang. Alhamdulillah. Honorable Vice of Dean, Head and Secretary of Program, lecturers and students in Engineering Faculty, University Islam Sultan Agung, Unisula Semarang. Respectable all guests and the participants, ladies and gentlemen. At this very moment, I would like to welcome you to a hybrid Studium Generale entitled Sustainability of Coastal Area Development. We are glad to have Dr. Johannes Herbeck and team in here to share knowledge about the issue. Well, Semarang is one of coastal cities in Indonesia. It is always interesting to discuss on how to develop coastal area. This agenda aims to enhance cooperation and strengthen our networking between Unisula and University of Bremen, German, and universities of Indonesia and etc. Finally, we would like to thank all the community members of organizing this event. We apologize for any inconvenience you may experience. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation. We look forward to have more project and another research action on a great level. So, we call Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, a hybrid Studium Generale by title Sustainability on Coastal Area Development open. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahmat Mudiono, MT PhD. Presentation speakers to Mr. and Prof. Imam to come to the stage. Out of grant, both national and such as Erasmus Plus. He writes actively in national and international reputative journals. Prof. And with national agencies and institutions like Rotterdam University, University Denong, and many more. And now, Prof. Imam Wahyudi is the head of postgraduate program in civil engineering Unisula. So, we please Johannes, Ibu Rapti, and Prof. Imam to begin the discussion.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you first to Mbak Miharti, who is MC of this meeting or General Stadium. And then thank you for welcome to Dr. Johannes Herbeck from Bremen University, and also Dr. Rapti Siriwardani, from Center for Tropical Marine Research, Germany, is also in Bremen. And now we have a plan for General Stadium. I like to inform you that the audience is not only in this room, but also in the Zoom meeting. There are students from PhD student, and then a master program, and bachelor as well. We know that until now atmosphere of pandemic is still still there, so we don't have not yet started fully in offline teaching, online teaching. So we start maybe next July, but now some meeting can be offline and other more in online. Okay, today we have to lecture from University of Bremen. First, Dr. Johannes Herbeck. Apologies me for spelling, maybe it's not good. Very good. And then Ibu Dr. Rapti Siriwardani. I think first time you are Indonesian, because your name is similar with Indonesian name. Dr. Johannes Herbeck, he studied in human geography at Technical University Munich. So you like football? Because Bayern Munich is always not Bayern Munich. And then he passed PhD from University of Bremen, PhD Bremen. And now Johannes Herbeck and Bu Rapti have a cooperation with Indonesia, Universitas Indonesia, for the research about sustainability in coastal area. And the next time maybe we can join the research, or maybe in the next research scheme, maybe together with Universitas Indonesia. That's also a long time we have cooperation. And another university that we have close for a long time with Rotterdam University and University of Sciences Groningen. Okay, and then Bu Rapti, she is environmental anthropologist. So I think it's interesting. We can make a study in multidisciplinary, because we have many research more about construction infrastructure, but we we know that non-technical aspect is also important, yeah, to manage infrastructure. And Bu Ratri have cooperation not only with Indonesian but also Philippines, and then Singapore, and Southeast Asia. Okay. And to manage the Studium Generale, I think first Dr. Johannes Herbeck present your topic, and then if there are question from audience, student or lecturer in this room, you can raise hand and take your question. And then also we like to follow a question from Zoom, maybe chatting question by chat, and the participant from Zoom can also take question directly by raise hand your Zoom meeting. And I think you all can present about 40 minutes, all, yeah. And then we discuss. But when there are students have important to take question, maybe we can give the time to take their question. Please, Dr. Johannes Herbeck, the time is yours.
Hello. Yes. So, Honorable Dean Rahmat Mudiono, Honorable Professor Imam Wahyudi, Honorable faculty members and students, ladies and gentlemen, we're really pleased to be here today, and already now thank you very much for welcoming us at your faculty. And we are pleased that we are able to give you an idea of our project and the questions that we bring with us. I have prepared a presentation of about 40 minutes, and I will follow Prof. Wahyudi's suggestion that we have time for discussions afterward and also for feedback, because this is really important for get your opinion on our ideas and agendas. So first of all, I would like to stress again that it's a team of many people that works on the project that is called Blue Urbanism. So first of all, it's the team members of the Universitas Indonesia that I would like to thank very much as well for being here. Ibu Muti, Ibu Sasa, and Pak Iqbal. And then it's again also Dr. Rapti Siriwardana, which is together with me working on it from the German side, but it's very much a cooperative project that we're pursuing here, and we try to, from the very beginning, try to also involve other project partners. So you see a lot of logos here. We also have partners at Universitas, other partners at Universitas Indonesia who are not present here in Semarang. We have partners at the NUS in Singapore, the National University in Singapore, and we also do partner with the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines. So maybe to start the presentation and to give you an idea on what our main interests are, I was preparing the slides yesterday evening And I was thinking about the term that you gave it, or the name you gave it for today's session, Sustainability on Coastal Area Development. So I took all three terms that are in the title of today's session, sustainability, coastal areas, and the question of development. And probably if I would ask any person here in the room what they understand under those three terms, I would get as many answers as there are people in the room. I think it always depends very much on your personal perspective, what you understand under certain terms. And I've tried to give you some examples here. So the picture on the left is a fisherman from Tambaghlorok, with whom we talked shortly after we arrived on Sunday evening. Then in the middle there's a female farmer from East Frisia, that is an area close by to the city of Bremen where we are based. A rural area that is close to the coast but protected by high dikes. And finally, I chose a picture of myself being a social scientist, a researcher that has just arrived in this area, being based in a sustainability research center. So if you ask those three persons what they understand under those terms, for example, sustainability, if you would ask the fisherman in Tambaghlorok, he would probably think about the amount of fish that he used to catch or his parents used to catch, and think about the amount of fish that hopefully his sons will catch if they also decide to become fishermen. If you ask the farmer in East Frisia what is sustainability, she would maybe think about her harvest and the sea level rise issues that threaten some of those areas because of salinization of groundwater. And if I would be asked what is sustainability, I would probably come up with a very formal definition derived from literature. Something about intergenerational justice or the use of resources that should replenish. The same with coastal areas. If you would ask the fisherman, he would probably say, it's my home, it's where I live. That is the coastal area. The farmer lady from East Frisia would maybe say, oh, it's this place that is beyond the dike that protects my land. This is the coast, but I'm living somewhere else. And for me, again, I would probably come up with a more formal definition, a certain distance from the shoreline that defines a coastal space. And finally, the question of development. Here again, all three people would give very different answers. The fisherman would probably think about his boat or his equipment and whether there could be some improvements for his fishing techniques, or also about his housing situation. If you would ask a farmer from East Frisia, she would probably think about her farming methods and whether there could be something like digitalized farming techniques to improve her farming. And again, if you would ask me, then I would probably come up with some critical thoughts about development discourses and also the colonial legacies that come with it, seeing it as a concept that also has been criticized for a long time. So when you think about those different answers and the different perspectives around certain terms, I think there's a lot of factors that determine how we think about certain issues. That, for example, could be a question also of gender or age, the occupation that you follow, the place where you have been born. Of course, also a question of education and experiences that you've made that determine very much how you fill certain terms with ideas. And to finally come to closer to what we're interested in, probably you could also sum it up or put the question of knowledge in the center. That probably where probably a lot of those factors come together. Your formal education, also the way you have been raised and lived, that very much impact how you interpret certain ideas or terms. So knowledge really is a central issue for us in our research project, because we think that it not only touches the question how you interpret or you use terminology, it also impacts it also impacts the way you problematize certain issues, what you consider as being problematic, for example, in the context of coastal sustainability. And of course, it also very much determines what kind of solutions you would see related to those problematizations that you make based on your personal history and the knowledge you have. At the same time, we are quite sure, or we are convinced that not all knowledges are equal. If you think back again to the persons that I've shown you in the beginning, and you maybe add other people, officers in the planning sphere, city planners, or consultants that come to coastal areas and think about problems and solutions to certain issues, it is clear that not all knowledges are heard equally. So this is to introduce or give you a first idea what our research interests evolve around. I've mentioned earlier that it's a collaborative project. It's called, now here's the long term, I called it Blue Urbanism before. The long version is Towards Blue Urbanism for Sea Level Change Adaptation, Global Trajectories and Speculative Futuring in Island Southeast Asia. In the pre-discussion, you already mentioned that it's a longer ongoing project, also a longer ongoing cooperation between Bremen University, Universitas Indonesia and the other institutions that I've mentioned. So we had a first phase of the project that took 3 years, and that was very much a study looking at 3 different coastal cities, Jakarta, Singapore and Manila. And within this sample of cities, we were interested in, again, the knowledges, the ideas and solutions for living with sea level change, how they gain traction in the region, how different ideas and knowledges gain political legitimacy, why and how. So we also try to map out what kinds of solutions might be exchanged between the 3 cities. At the same time, also asking whose interest some of those solutions that we saw would be serving. And it was not unsurprising for us to see that there's still, in most of the cities that we look at, there's still a very strong focus on hard engineering infrastructure solutions that dominate the kinds of solutions that are discussed in the cities, grand infrastructure projects. At the same time, it was also clear, or what we took from this first phase of our research, it was clear that the flow of ideas is not unidirectional. And I felt it very much also in the discussion we had earlier today, that knowledge is not something that necessarily flows to those cities from external advisors. They do play a role in it, but there's a lot of experimentation also in those cities themselves, ideas that are generated and then probably flow back to other places, travel back to places of origin. So to really, then we took it to the second phase, a Blue Urban project, and we've decided to focus on those global networks of innovations that you would find in coastal adaptation. And we've decided to follow them from sites where they are developed to places of circulation where some of those ideas are promoted and reshuffled to then the actual implementation of some of those ideas in projects. So this is how we designed the project. As I said, we are focusing on two very concrete technologies of coastal adaptation that we consider as being very innovative and that have gained traction over those past years. They have been broadly discussed both on global levels but also very localized levels. And so first we look at multifunctional dikes, an issue that is quite relevant also for the city of Semarang, as we've learned. And the second infrastructure that we look at is floating structures or artificial islands. And again, we find a lot of ideas and knowledges that are produced here, and we're happy to see that. As I said earlier, we try to follow those technologies in their global networks from sites of innovation that could be research labs like the one you have, faculties that work on those innovations, but also external consultancies that develop some of those knowledges. Then the next step would be sites of circulation that could be, for example, science fairs, that could be conferences where some of this knowledge or those innovations are shown, are presented, and probably then also sold to other places. And finally, we call it sites of adaptation. That's the projects that we want to look at, the materialization of some of those ideas, how they are then actually implemented in projects. What cross-cuts all those three sites, those localities that we're interested in, is on the one hand something we call discourse carriers, with which we mean the networks of actors that in which those ideas are then circulated. And the second thing would be epistemic channels. With this we mean the very modes how knowledge is mobilized. So how and communicated. That could, for example, be. It can take very different forms. It could be as simple as a newsletter by an international donor organization like the World Bank, where you find information about those infrastructures. But it could also be a study tour where people are brought together and look at some of those new technologies. So you might ask, why are we talking about blue urbanism? This was a kind of entry point that we took when developing the proposal, because we saw it at that time as a kind of emerging planning mantra that could touch, or that touches some of the questions that we ask ourselves. It goes back to Timothy Beatley, a US planning scholar, that published some of those ideas around blue urbanism from 2014 onwards, and the discourse took, so it was received quite well. And what Beatley does, basically he proposes a new form of urbanism for coastal cities, in which the boundaries between the city and the ocean that have been made strong over the past decades and centuries are somehow blurred, how the urban and the oceanic can be mixed, frontiering both areas. His main issue was to reconnect the cities to the oceans that surround urban spaces in a way that we regarded as being quite utilitarian and resource-centric. He proposes, or he talks a lot about strengthening fisheries, aquaponics, also the creation of energy through of wave energy and similar things. But still, he then goes on to carry it beyond, also suggesting a very profound transformation of former literal citizenry into something what he calls Homo aqua urbanis. So you also already see that we are, despite using it, we are also skeptical around it, and we see that there's a lot of critique around it, also to the extent to which within the discourse a flattening of transcultural differences also happens. Transcultural differences, especially with regard to land-sea interactions and sensibilities around that. Just by looking at the example that Timothy Beatley uses for claiming this blue urbanism is quite telling. He talks often about Rotterdam, about New York, maybe also Copenhagen, and to a very little extent maybe also Singapore, but then it really stops here. So it's really a Western, very much Western-centric discourse that you would find here. But still we found it worthwhile to take it as a lens, maybe as an entry point to think about some of the issues that can also then kind of be reflected in the infrastructures that we look at. So blue urbanism more than as a background lens, a general paradigm shift, as I said, towards integrating urban planning and the everyday life of citizens in coastal cities with the oceans that they are surrounded by. And we brought this forward, or we felt the necessity also to not just look at what is really actually materializing, but we thought it's also important to think about the imaginaries, the futuring practices that are behind some of those claims. So it's really about looking at how delta and coastal cities are future, or well, how futuring is practiced in delta and coastal cities. So I think I have already talked about the infrastructures that we look at, but probably it's also important to see that, of course, choosing those two very concrete infrastructures also meant that multifunctional dikes would be probably considered more on a more traditional protective form of living away with waters, whereas floating structures could be more related to more terra aquas and also amphibious ways of living with water and embracing the waters around coastal cities. So probably as another general background, we think that seeing the solutions, what we call climate solutions here in cities, and the proposed projects, how to prepare cities to climate change, is also, you could very much see it as a binary between a very risk-driven discourse on the one hand, but also increasingly an opportunity-driven discourse. And I'm citing here of a recent UN Habitat publication where you would see this contrast in one very document. And I'm citing here, cities worldwide are increasingly suffering the effects of climate-related and other challenges and hazards such as floods, droughts, sea level rise, heat waves, landslides, and storms. So a very strong focus on the risks that cities face in face of climate change. But then the document goes on and says, while facing important challenges, cities are also places of opportunity and innovation in developing sustainable solutions to bounce forward after a disruption. Therefore, climate adaptation is one of the key priorities for future urban resilience and the health and well-being of people and the environment. And I found it quite interesting to see this contrast. So there's this risk-driven discourse on the one hand, but then also it shows that cities are laboratories, maybe places where innovations are made regarding protection and living, but probably then also living with sea level. So this now the next couple of slides go back to work that we've been doing under the earlier under the first phase, and that kind of reflect some of those basic assumptions that I've just mentioned. So when looking, for example, at a place like a huge area like North Jakarta and the climate change issues that you would find around there, of course, the first thing that you see is that there's a diversity of waters something that we would call a multiple littoral. So really going back to the different perspectives that I've mentioned in the beginning, different views on what waters are, what kinds of waters are in the area, and how you deal with them. When you look at some of the interventions, government interventions in those areas, you could see that there have been a succession of planning and also development mantras that have very much changed over time, also kind of reflecting those transition that I've just mentioned from more risk-driven to finally then incentive-driven interventions, something that we call speculative futuring in our approaches. So when looking at those mainly governmental-driven interventions in the 3 cities that we looked at in the first phase, and we've picked some of the major projects or development ideas that you would find in those cities: the disaster risk reduction master plan for Manila Bay, the NCICD planning for Jakarta, and Singapore's adaptation pathways. The first thing you would see is like similarities, at least in the approaches that you have. Infrastructure-based solutions that are proposed to those cities and carried on. So you could ask: is it maybe a catch-up development of heavy infrastructuration? Whereas in other contexts, there's also debates around, for example, more nature-based solutions. And at first sight, there was little evidence of traces of those discourses. And this, all of you probably are quite know this very well. Sorry, the larger planning processes in Jakarta City around the so-called Great Garuda, a story that is you're probably quite familiar with. That has been like a Dutch consortium, not only led but at least inspired mega project to really save the lost city, and we've termed it from a lost city to the spectacular urbane, also including island reclamation as a probably new coast rush, something that we then summed up as speculative futuring, because it not only speculates about the futures that are expected in the city, but there's also a lot of speculation with capital and infrastructures and real estate. Yes. And you would, of course, find similar proposals or discussions in the other places that we looked at. This is the so-called City of Pearl in Manila Bay that has been proposed, probably with a lesser focus on coastal protection issues, but still a very strong focus on creating new land along the coast, although they are considered as being under high risks of sea level change. So we also tried to map out how those different knowledges and maybe also international involvements within those 3 large scale projects have been, and there are some similarities but also differences. How this international involvement unfolds, not only regarding the actors that we've mapped here, but also regarding the very modes how external influences unfold in the context of those projects. And it's also clear, and we've seen this, for example, in Jakarta, that there are also critical voices regarding this, those large infrastructure projects, and also regarding the international involvements around it. This is a picture that we found from the Safe Jakarta Bay that at least raised some of those issues or problematized some of those issues around the proposed development planning. So having seen this in our first phase, then, as I said, we've decided to have a stronger focus on those very concrete technologies that we now look at. And I'll dive quickly into some of the very preliminary results that we've made during the past 1.5 years of the second phase. As I said, we were looking at both sides of innovation, sides of circulation, and sides of adaptation. And this is an example of what we did at an early stage of the study. We traveled to Delft because there was a group of scholars that had been doing research around multifunctional dikes. They themselves were quite clear that it's although it's somehow a new term that they've been using, it's something very established and something that has been practiced for a long time, that you have those coastal infrastructures that are not single-purposed, but, for example, are used as grazing facilities for sheep in the Netherlands, or for creating roads on top. But still they were doing it, they were looking at it in a very systematic way, terming it multifunctional dikes, and then also were part of looking at it from very different perspectives. And when going there, we also realized that from the very beginning, they also thought of how they could also circulate this idea. So, for example, the relations to Singapore were quite obvious when being at this group. We also talked to Deltares, the Water Institute in the Netherlands, and they also have people working on this idea of multifunctionality at dikes, also admitting that it's not only about the multifunctional flood defenses. They say we're more focusing on how to combine and optimize the different values within certain locations. The challenge is also to increase the livability of the dike. So this was very much their focus for the people that live there, but also in the hinterlands. And they give some examples, and we saw some of them. So on the left-hand side, you see the dike in Katwijk aan Zee that is combined with the parking garage. And Deltares has been involved in the design. And on the right-hand side, you see the Scheveningen Boulevard, where there's a protective infrastructure that is combined with a more a promenade kind of design. So those are then probably the transitions to more the sides of adaptation that we are interested in. And the issues that were raised also by Deltares when reflecting upon the process, how this multifunctional flood defense in Katwijk aan Zee came into being, they were also admitting that if you look at the process, how this parking garage was created, it's a drama really. In the beginning, there was no trust between the regional water authority and the municipality. They were like cats and dogs. At the end, the regional water authority paid for parts of the parking garage, but still there's still difficulties about who is responsible for what. So, of course, when adding other different functions to an infrastructure, that also means that there's other actors that certainly have to be involved, and it's not always clear then to determine the responsibility between those actors. So the issue of floating structures, work package 2, we were also trying to look at different sides of innovation. We went to Rotterdam Harbor, where you would find a floating structure that probably some of you know, the pictures or the area even. So it's I think it's also a multi-purpose venue. You could have conferences there and things alike. So very much a pilot project that has been there for a couple of years. But then coming here, of course, and doing some desktop research on Semarang, we realized that you could regard Semarang also very much as a site of innovation when it comes to those floating infrastructures. And I've just put a picture here of the floating library that we've just discussed about earlier. So it's really fascinating to see what is going on here. So to put this in the perspective, what are we planning to do? I think a major question that we have in mind is really what can those different technologies that I've shown, what can multifunctional dikes and floating structures really contribute to sustainable futures of coasts, to stick with the today's session. But we also want to understand what are maybe also challenges. I've shown the example of the Katwijk am See dike. What are challenges and also risks of their use in coastal settings? We also are very interested in understanding what forms of collaboration are needed in those very experimental phases of introducing a new technology. Collaboration between knowledge brokers, you could call them, and adopters. And what does this then also mean for translations that are needed? Because you cannot simply replicate a solution at a different place, but there needs to be discussion also about the use of materials, for example, at other places. So this is more like the core interest of our research, but besides that, we also had a number of other activities which are not less important. So all that I've now reflected on really focused on, I would say, more expert-driven discourses with a lot of research groups involved. But of course, you would also see a lot of innovative practices around living with or against sea level change in much more informal settings and setups. So that's why we are also interested in researching also the everyday life worlds of, for example, subsidence. And we did this for a couple of years in northern Jakarta, where you would have, of course, really a multiplicity of watery flows, as I've mentioned earlier, of different fluxes and states of water in some of those areas. But at the same time, and I'm sure you all know that, it's very similar to what happens in some of the places in Semarang as well, that there's very informal and we call it vernacular adaptive practices that might be considered as reactionary, as piecemeal solutions, as very much household-based, but nevertheless, there are a lot of ideas and actual practices that are happening to dealing with this kind of situations. We live between swamp and soil, just to cite some of those people. It's now like a river, wet all the time, so they perceive changes, but they also develop ways of living with them. And one of those examples that especially also Rapti looked at in more detail is the practice of Nimbun, of self-reclamation, an act of soil making where people would use different kinds of materials, construction rubble, wooden shards, but also shells as a basis to create really higher grounds, not just extending land, but creating higher grounds in areas that experience subsidence. So you would see layered heaps that are left to follow. It's very much a gendered social practice, but it's at the same time a very distinct urban knowledge, and that's why it's really interesting for us to see also the development of those very, you could say, bottom-up practices of adapting to changes in the sea level. What we did as another activity in a project, I don't know how much time do I still have? How am I time-wise? I don't know. I will just continue. So, as I've also mentioned earlier, we're interested in those ideas about futuring. So really. Often in very experimental and open setups to think about the future of a city. and we thought about visualizations of as a very important element in those futuring practices. And we've, together with colleagues from architecture background, we've designed a role game that we've tried to, now it's very much in a testing phase, that allows for the fact that games can be a very important tool of making really tangible the multiple knowledges and aspirations for coastal futures amongst various stakeholders. And we think that visualizations can be a very important medium to explore the multiple views on waters and also the littoral, as well as on different protective strategies. So we've developed a kind of a role game that takes one of the part of, it's a fictive part of Manila, and we've invited a history around it. We've developed various roles that people would be given within the role play, that all come with a certain also hidden agenda, sometimes hidden, sometimes also open agendas that they bring to the game. So we've chosen representatives of Wildlife and Biodiversity Department, of the Social Housing and Welfare Agency. We had 2 resident association representatives, a high-end gated community representative versus a more low-income informal residents representative. We've chosen 2 business representatives, a property developer and a factory owner, and some agencies members, disaster agency, the transport ministry, the human rights advisor to the mayor, the National Heritage Trust representative, and finally a leader of the Fisheries Cooperative Union. And what we did is then to have, because all of this of course happened during also the pandemic situations, all of this was then very much based on an online platform. We've used, what was it called again? The online platform? Miro. We've used a Miro board and first created a kind of map view that people could use to get acquainted with the situation and to see what kind of solutions would be necessary. But then on the downside, you see also on the lower side, you see that we also provided some of the infrastructure solutions that we see could be important for in these situations. Amongst them, also of course the floating infrastructure and the multifunctional dikes, but also a variety of other artifacts that could be used in those visualization games, and then we tested it with 2 times now, mainly scholars from our research institutes, but we are planning to also extend it and to have different actors involved. And this is one of the outcomes that you see how those arrangements around those visualizations really happen. This is another example. What was the outcome? I don't know why those turbines fly in the air, but still, it's speculative. So maybe to kind of come to a conclusion, both from what we did as a research, but also for our future plans. So I think still there's very much a focus on those grand infrastructural projects that are, but nowadays carried out beyond just centeredness of risk, but also looking at those more incentive-driven forms of speculative futuring. We still think that blue urbanism can really serve as a potential new planning paradigm. But as I said earlier, there's little attention paid to cultural differences, how this really is spelled out in different cultural contexts. And we also think that, especially regarding those bigger projects, the sustainability of those current paradigms they have to be scrutinized in really carefully. Whose sustainability is it that we are talking about in those projects? And what kind of coastal areas really are the outcome or the result of such coastal space-making processes? More regarding the idea, the question of knowledges and the transfer of knowledge, we also have some conclusions, but there are, of course, there are still more answers than more questions than answers from our side. I think we've seen that the international, also city-to-city connections are in a way crucial for this knowledge transfer in coastal adaptation. But we still ask what are probably conditions for a successful transfer of some of those ideas, and also what kinds of translations are happening in the course of such transfers. We continue to ask what role is there for effective or emotional futuring practices through, for example, those visualizations that we've tried to capture in the game. And we do ask, of course, also, and again, it's very interesting to be here because you're tackling some of those issues. How can we really think about a transfer of knowledge of local forms of adaptation and also low-cost solutions that are probably a very crucial question when it comes to transfer of knowledges. So I think I'd like to leave it here. So for the Q&A, it's going to be also the whole team that is happy to receive your feedback. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johannes Herbeck. I give some point important that related between infrastructure and social and political aspect. First, in north of Central Java, we have problem flood, tidal flood from west of Central Java, Brebes, Tegal, and then Pekalongan, Semarang, Demak, Jepara, Pati. But the most serious disaster problem is in Semarang, Pekalongan, and Tegal and Demak. We have we choose the solution, two solutions. First is protecting this coastal with border system, and one of important infrastructure in border system is dike, and then we have a creation to make a multi-function dike, as toll route along of Semarang to Demak that starting to build. And then the second one to make a sustainability in this area, first is protection, and then the second is adaptation. Adaptation, we want to live in this area with a floating building or make a house higher than normal with pile housing. This one is when infrastructure needed to adapt sea level rise, sea level change. And then we know that to solve the problem, we not only approach in technical approach with big infrastructure, but there are many aspects that Johannes present. First, about a social aspect, politics, law, and then finance and institution. And one keyword that I know today is knowledge translation. Yeah, I think it's also important. Yeah, this aspect. Yeah, we note this knowledge translation from where this technology, and then how to transfer the technology from research to circulation, and then adaptation and implementation. Yeah, I think it's also important aspect. And yeah, we know that Johannes Herbeck is from social geography, yeah, social geography. So I think this multidiscipline is very important to prepare, to anticipate sustainability the area the north of Central Java, north of Java, with problem many or several land lower than sea level. Yeah, and Johannes Herbeck proposed another approach, not only in the infrastructure, but we know the history of transfer knowledge and transfer technology, and where is seat of innovation, where is seat of circulation, where is seat of adaptation and implementation, the knowledge on the technology. Yeah, I think it's all that I understand, and make a relation, yeah, between infrastructure aspect, technical aspect, and social, political, law, knowledge aspect. Okay, I offer the discussion. Please, maybe first from this room to take the question, and then I also see the question from participant Zoom online. Yeah? Any question from this room first? Yeah, please, Pak Ari, and then there are another question from from Zoom, yeah. Please, Pak Ari.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for your coming. My name is Aris Sentani, and talking about sustainability, I teach about sustainable development and sustainable infrastructure, and I found in several areas we have to adapt with the local wisdom. My question: did you find this local wisdom maybe in Philippines, or maybe in Singapore, or maybe in Malaysia? Did you find it, and how we can adapt it to solve the problem in coastal area? Because in Indonesia, there's a lot of local wisdom that we can use to protect their village from the sea level rise. And then in Demak, because I come from Demak, we face a lot of problem. The government tried to solve the problem with the giant wall, super giant wall. Or toll road, sorry. And the impact, I afraid about the impact because the eastern of our area, it's more like the flooding is more higher and higher nowadays, for because of the toll road, we face about the problem. So, do you have maybe another perspective how we can solve it without make another problems? Because when we solve coastal area in the several area, like maybe in Semarang we can solve the flood with the border system maybe, and after it, that the water flow into our area in the mud. And nowadays, when you will face the problem, maybe in this week in Timbul Sloko, we face the sea level rise that every day people of Timbul Sloko living with the water. All the people in our area told us this is the effect of the toll road development. But from my perspective, because of the coastal area, there's a lot of problems, and then that accumulate the problem in the coastal, especially maybe in the Sayung or in the Timbul Sloko, in the northern of Demak area. So, if you have maybe another great and a good solution, we can promote it or we can adjust it to the government to solve it, because the people over there is every day facing the water, facing the tidal flood. Maybe that's my question.
Thank you very much for your question. I think it was at least two, but very interrelated questions. So the first question, I'll start with the later ones. What you've just described is quite established and a common phenomenon that you would find in those cases where there's attempts to stabilize the coast, for example, with revetments or dikes. And much of it has to do to what we saw also in other contexts with the transport of sediments that is somehow changed also through concrete buildings in the coastal areas. And in fact, we've, for example, done research in West Africa where you would see a certain community starting to build revetments to trap sediments to stop an erosive process, and then just shifting the problem to other places. So I think it's a very common thing that you see in the context of those infrastructure developments. And I mean, I'm not really in the position to give an advice here, but we do observe also, of course, and that probably leads to the second question that you posed regarding local knowledges or popular knowledges around some of those adaptive strategies. And I mean, some of those things are discussed under various labels also in the engineering sphere, I think, like nature-based solutions or building with nature approaches that at least allow for some of those challenges. And I know that there have been also around this area experiments with, for example, planting mangroves as an alternative way of stabilizing a coast. So I mean, there are a lot of ideas around there, but I think often it's also a question of scale and are those solutions really suitable for all areas? And probably the answer is no. So it's a tricky one, yes. And yeah, maybe, I don't know, Rabbi, if you want to say something about also about the question of local knowledges, or.
Yes, thank you for that question, Bapak Ari, because it's rich, it's multi-stranded. In fact, you've in some ways touched on a lot of complexities that we're grappling with as well. With respect to nature-based solutions, I mean, vernacular architecture, for example, is another interesting case study for us, because the question that we're grappling with is, while there is also a global push towards, floating architecture and design forms, also, with the UN taking up this call for floating cities as a more sort of regional or global solution. The question for us also is, floating infrastructure in the broadest sense, in the context of the archipelago, also in the Philippines, both archipelagos, it's been there since time immemorial. And if you look at particular designs of rumah panggung houses, for example, but of course they're also they're localized, they're also regionalized, and there's this question with respect to rural-urban flows and interlinkages as well, because with our work in Jakarta, particularly northern Jakarta, where you've had generations of migrants who probably came from Sulawesi and parts of the archipelago from the 50s or even further back in time, and they brought some of these practices with them. But then the question is, how do you then adapt that to urban fabric or rapidly urbanizing fabric? And then that kicks up a whole host of other complexities. For example, in the Nimbun case study, where it's also a collaging of it's very experimental, but again, this also brings us back to this question of terms and concepts, and we're quite I would say careful about using terms like traditional local knowledge, because it also brings across this idea that knowledge is fixed in time, that it doesn't change, but it does with generations of experimentation, and also it's not localized in the sense that knowledges have been traveling, and so then that brings again another question about what is local and what's not. So we use terms like translocal knowledge to also understand the fact that sometimes there might have also been cross-continental crossings over during colonialism and well beyond before that. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you, Pak Ari, and I think it's clear the answer from Johannes, Herbeck, and Rabdi. Please, I give the time from Zoom online. We have about 60 participants from Zoom online. So more than this room. Please, one of participant raise hand. Pak Huda Praja. Please, Pak Huda Praja, take your time to question.
Well, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, thank you for the presentation. Good presentation from your Mr. Herbeck. Maybe we already meeting in 1 week ago in Zoom meeting also, and I have tell about something quite interesting about Indonesia. Our government now is have a lot of work in infrastructure. We built everything in Indonesia, like toll road, like dike, everything about water problem, and also in a villager and etc. But one of linear with your research, I think, is in a toll road, Semarang Demak. One of infrastructure which is built for adaptation climate change, which is have water intrusion in Semarang, have a flooding because of sea level rising, and have a flooding disaster. Then government decide to build a toll road, which is a copy in Afsluitdijk in the Netherlands. Afsluitdijk Netherlands built in 1954. Yeah. And then, sorry, is there any problem with my voice? Hello?
Please continue, Mas Huda. Please continue.
Yeah. And then I will continue my work about toll roads. And then our government decided to build a toll road in Semarang Demak to decrease the sea level and copy it with Afsluitdijk in Netherlands. And one of video I already watched the design of in toll roads. There is like a multifunctional dike, like I don't know, water pump station or like maybe for rest area and everything. But maybe one of suggestion for Mr. Herbeck, maybe if you come up with like a multifunctional dike, maybe Indonesian people is like a religion people. Maybe we can start with like a multifunctional mosque or etc. with interesting architecture. So maybe people in the region will be like interested with your like design or do it in the region. So maybe that is like one of solution to come up with people around your research. And also like I'm still waiting your research in the future, and I will like waiting your what of your research in the maybe in the future. I will waiting to like maybe your proceeding or something to Semarang. What kind of research? What kind of your research in Semarang will be like taking place in Semarang? Will be like adapted in Semarang. Maybe I will waiting. This is not question. It's just like a talking. For sure, I'm waiting your research. Thank you. That is like my word. Thank you, Pak Imam and the audience. Well, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah. Okay. Then I note first about keyword of toll route Semarang Demak, how to adapt if this infrastructure bill, and then they propose about interesting architecture use for local community and your future research.
Yes, thank you for all those questions. Some of them I took rather as suggestions, especially mentioning that of course there has to be, when talking about a new adaptive strategy, there has to be also an added value for out of the perspective of the people that will use it in future. And one suggestion would be, so I took it to think about interesting designs and maybe also different forms of functions that could be made part of something like that, be it religious functions, but also maybe housing, as you would see in other places. So I take this as an important suggestion and food for thought for designing our future research. And I was happy to hear that, I'm happy to explain also that for the future research, at the moment I would say we ourselves are at an experimental stage, because we also are looking into ways to develop it further. But just to state this one more time, I mean, we're really interested in understanding those, well, the kind of experimental settings that you are obviously part of, the experimentation that we saw also at the Demak toll road site, really trying to make use of existing materials and try to see, for example, how to use bamboo in some of those infrastructure developments. So this is really something that will hopefully continue in future, also to understand how those experiments are really done and what are probably also supportive environments under which experiments can be made successfully. Yes, thank you again.
Yeah, and in this room there are Pak Dedi, ya. Pak Dedi, he is a director of the owner of toll route from a national company, government company. Maybe Pak Dedi can explain a little bit about toll route progress, because now he built toll route section 2 from Sayong Demak, and then right now prepare toll route construction from Semarang to Sayong. Please, Pak Dedi, maybe you can add information about toll route.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. About toll road from Semarang to Demak is divided to two sections. Section 1 from Kaligawe from Semarang to Sayong, and section 2 from Sayong to Demak. Now the construction progress for section 2 about 80%, and the section 1, that's a toll road integrated with sea dike and retention pond will start about August or September this year. Now we prepare the trial embankment with bamboo and two layer of fill and preloading. Now still about 20% from trial embankment. Maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Dedi. Pak Dedi, he know more about toll route also, because they start from beginning this toll route ID, and now he is director of toll route owner who will be operator toll route Semarang to Demak, and fortunately he is like science, and he follow he also make a research with us about coastal reservoir along of this toll route, and he is start a PhD program, and I think you can cooperate more with Pak Dedi and our campus, because it's also our concern, not only student but also the professor work and take interest the topic of toll route and floating building. Okay, maybe from this room there are another question. Yeah, please, Bu Heni.
Yeah, thank you. We know that floating structure is one of solution for the community who live in the coastal area to adapt of the sea level rise. But depend on my research before, we find that there is a problem to inform about the floating structure, to make a community move from their living before from the simple house on the land to move to the floating house on the water. There is social aspect here. So I want to know about your research in Manila and also Singapore. Do you discuss about social aspect also like this in the Manila and Singapore also? Because it is not easy to ask the community moving from the house on the land to the house on the water. Thank you.
Thank you for that question again. And I'll try to keep this brief because there are quite a few points to touch on. But with respect to relocation, right? And often the term that we've heard policy planners both in Indonesia and the Philippines use is managed retreat. And I'm talking again specifically about urban areas. So this would be, say, northern Jakarta and the Bay of Manila. Singapore is slightly different, but because there has been a historic process of relocation since the 70s from the islands, but also the coast. So that's a different story altogether. But back to this question of managed retreat, which is an interesting paradox or a contradiction, because oftentimes there have been coastal nelayan communities that did move or were asked to move from the coast to rusuns. I wouldn't really call them high-rises because they're about 5 stories high. It's the same with Manila because that process is ongoing. And then that has, again, had its own sort of trajectory of adaptation where these communities have been used to, in some ways, living and interacting with water. And it's quite a shock in some ways, existentially as well, in going hinterland, but now dry living, but also vertical living, right? So there's that fear of heights and all that. But on the other hand, now you're talking, again, there's the cross flow of that, which is from, say, the hinterland or building on water and then moving back to the water. And that, again, is a question we've been asking policymakers this time around in terms of, the uptake of particular kinds of floating solutions and, even smaller houses, for example. And, we recently met a policymaker who said, well, it's oftentimes a lot of these communities are not too happy to inhabit or own something on water, because then the question now is really about property rights. We're used to thinking about property and land ownership in terms of the terra firma, and that kicks up a whole other set of questions about also the legalities around, but also the legal, paradigms around it in terms of also land use planning and what land actually is if you're taking surface water. Thank you for the question.
You have another...
Yes, maybe to add on that, Ibu Remi, thanks for the question. Probably the comparison with Singapore and Manila is a bit hard to draw for us because, we mainly went there for the first phase where this focus on those infrastructures has not been that strong. So, but this is something that we still plan or might plan for the future. So the idea of floating infrastructures was not something that we really followed in those 2 cities, but of course there might be as emerging issues as they are here. And regarding also the other aspect that you've mentioned, that it's somehow hard to bring in the communities or convince communities that this could be an alternative way of embracing water. I was just spontaneously thinking that then probably it's also a question of co-designing some of those infrastructures to bring in community representatives from the very beginning, and also trying to make use of what you've just mentioned, the local knowledges that might still be there, and the materials they would use for their other forms of housing to just create a feeling of ownership also towards some of those solutions.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one last thing which I forgot to mention. In the case of the Philippines, there are groups, and again I'm talking about Metro Manila, architectural and urban planning associations. I mean, there can be NGOs, but also firms like Tao Filipinas that are looking at sort of building pro-poor constructions where some of these architects have also been working or researching in places like the Mekong Delta and have, brought some of those sort of structural solutions and are now deliberating on how to sort of codify it into legal practice. And oftentimes, I mean, the Manila Water Code has been often cited as an issue that has also prevented certain kinds of building because of buffer zoning and all that. But it really requires that kind of very deep-seated paradigm shift because urban planning and design has been terra-centric. And that essentially is also what, proponents like Tim Beatley are pushing. Rather than, so we have green belting, but, think about blue belting as well. And those kinds of, hybrid mixed blue-green, gray solutions. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about the relation between innovation, circulation, adaptation, and realization. I think it's important. We are from a campus. We have many idea, many innovation. And what's your experience? Make the innovation, the research result to implement, to adapt to the reality, and how do we do to be more effective and to be faster and faster implemented this idea or innovation. Maybe you have experience about it because you have this experience in this case.
Thanks, Prof. Yudi, for this question. So, as I tried to explain earlier, our research institute, is not really involved, or at least the group where I'm working in is not really involved in technology development. It's but I can still maybe relate to your question when it comes to the group at ARTEC, at the Sustainability Research Center that does the research on energy transitions, because this is an issue that is in the German context now probably one of the largest transitions that you would see. And of course the technology is more or less developed, but then the question that comes with it is and the practicality of really implementing those transformations that are needed is a very strong discourse at the moment also in Germany, and it comes with a lot of questions also of acceptance of certain solutions, and a need to really adopt the community's view in implementing some of those issues, and so probably it really comes down to the question of communication that needs to be tackled probably from the very early beginning of such a technology development. And there are some experiences, but I'm happy to also establish contacts there that could probably deepen some of those thoughts.
Okay, are there any questions?
Sorry, Prof. Imam, I think it's almost duhur, so we have no time to continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johannes Herbeck and Rapti as well, who are from University of Bremen. Yeah, we have already discussing about many things, especially about sustainability in coastal area who has a problem in north of Java, also Central Java, and you have you give another thinking, yeah, another thinking, not only infrastructure and something technology, but also about the knowledge, how transfer the knowledge, and then implement the knowledge and technology to communicate. Also another aspect important, and we have interesting, and we work about this subject, and we have also some student in master or PhD student who work also in this subject about border system, multifunction dike, floating, yeah, that have potential to have cooperation with you. Thank you for all participants in this room and participant in Zoom meeting as well. And my apologies if I have some error during my as be moderator. Thank you, and the time I give to MC. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Johannes, Ibu Rapti, and Prof. Imam Wahyudi. What an interactive and also interesting discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, before I close the agenda today, maybe we please Prof. Imam Wahyudi to give kind of certificate to the speakers. Maybe in front of the stage. The first certificate belongs to Johannes. Yeah, and can take pictures together. Yeah, it's from Unisula. Yeah, it's souvenir from engineering faculty. Yeah, please give applause to Prof. Imam and Johannes. Okay, Johannes, please stay there. And the second one, Purapti, please. The certificate. The medal. It's from Unisula. The next one is souvenir from engineering faculty. Yeah, please stay there, Prof. and Johannes Purapti. Please, Mas Rio. Mas Rio is representative from Office of International Affairs, Unisula. He brings also something for Johannes and Ibu Rapti. Johannes first, okay. And Ibu Rapti, please. Yeah. Maybe Pak Abdul, Pak Rusli, Pak Eko can come forward to have photo together. And also Bu Heni, Pak Ari, Pak Juni, another lecturers please. And also Mbak Muti and team from Universitas Indonesia. Mas Rio? The first style, maybe formal style. The freestyle, Bapak Ibu. Ya, with all participants please. Ayo semua peserta silahkan ikut foto bersama. With all participants. Silahkan Bapak Ibu semua yang hadir bisa foto bersama. Ya, maskernya dilepas dulu teman-teman mahasiswa. Yeah, thank you very much everyone for the participation. See you in another occasion inshallah. The last we say wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.